Hello and welcome to the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. On the show this evening, we examine in detail the 150 million rand Health Department media contract that never was.
The investigation has found that the tender bidding process followed was in contravention of the Public Finance Management Act. The process of appointing Digital Vibes was irregular. Irregularity findings range from inconsistencies in the bid committees to lack of disclosure of conflict of interest. Secondly, the investigators have found that an amount of some 37 million paid to Digital Vibes constitute fruitless and wasteful expenditure.
Well, today the SIU announced that it was granted a preservation order by the Special Tribunal last week after it presented evidence that it has gathered thus far in its investigation into allegations of unlawful and irregular dealings between Digital Vibes and the Department of Health.
It is now being granted that the monies be freezed until we are done with our investigation, because we need to get to the bottom of each and every part of that investigation. Therefore, the 10 days was just in the beginning when we were working with the FIC, because the FIC only has powers to freeze for 10 days to allow us to do what we wanted to do. We are interviewing all the relevant stakeholders that needs to be interviewed, and we are hopeful that we will be in a position to give the President the report at the end of this month.
Well, suspended Health Minister Zweli Mkhize is adamant that there was no wrongdoing on his part.
Also, do not regard any of these individuals whose names have been mentioned publicly as personal friends, but they are certainly my comrades. I have worked with them in the ordinary course of my political or official duties, and this is not unusual. As minister, my obligation is to declare any conflict of interest when it arises, and in this instance, I had not identified any conflict of interest.
The 22 million is the monies that we found when we started the investigation, the monies that we found in the bank accounts of people. Obviously, some of the money has already been used to buy other things, and we'll get to that when we deal with this matter at a later stage. But we will make sure that each and every money, whether it is given to the third or the fourth person, will follow the money and make sure that we see where the money has gone to and what it went to that person for, to make sure that if it was given unfairly to those people, that also will be taken back from them, and that can only happen at the end of the investigation.
So how is this money going to be recovered? Whose job is it going to be to do exactly that? To help us answer those questions and more, we're now joined by the spokesperson of the Special Tribunal, Selby Makgoto. Mr. Makgoto, good evening. Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. Take us through what needs to happen next following the steps that the SIU has taken, and where do you as the tribunal come in?
Thank you very much, Vuyo. Good evening to the listeners, and thanks indeed for having us. What actually transpired briefly is that we were approached on urgent basis on Thursday last week by the Special Investigating Unit for an urgent preservation order freezing the money held in the different bank accounts by the several respondents, Digital Vibes Pty Ltd being the first respondent. Allegations were traversed in the various founding affidavits by the SIU that actually compelled the Special Tribunal presiding judge, Lebogang Modiba, who on Thursday granted the order. What I need to indicate at this point in time that it is an interim order with the understanding by the Special Investigating Unit, as they said in the papers, that investigations are still going on, and part of the order is that they are given 30 days from the date effective of the order, that is the 17th of June. So 30 court days will actually run into mid-July. So wherein they are expected to institute a review application that is wherein they will come back to the special tribunal to seek an order to set aside and review the contract. So as matters stand, the order is to the effect that the money is held in the various bank accounts, various investment accounts, and various properties. The respondents have been directed not to dispose of any of those until the review application is served before the special tribunal.
Now, what criteria must an application to you satisfy to be able to get the order that you were able to give to the SIU?
Well, two things. The evidence, and that evidence will be entertained on a balance of probabilities. As and when the SIU comes before the special tribunal to seek an order, they need to satisfy these two main requirements. And in this particular case, maybe for you, I should also indicate that agency was alleged in the papers because they did indicate that they needed this order on urgent basis. Hence, the application was heard on urgent basis. And what this actually entails is that as and when an order is sought on urgent basis, it would mean that there is a particular urgent need to preserve the money as per the mandate of the special tribunal being a court of civil recovery proceedings. So as and when these matters come in, they are looked into, but agency should be justifiable. And as long as the matter is in the interest of justice, that allegations are to the effect that there is allegations of wrongdoing, and as such, the monies need to be recovered. That is primarily what the considerations are.
And what do you, or how do you determine objectively, now that was outside now of the applicant, whether or not the matter is indeed urgent?
Well, from the pleadings themselves, once the papers come, there will be an affidavit, there will be a notice of motion, there will be prayers. And I should also indicate that the special tribunal is not the court of the SIU. The SIU, for instance, would not come to a special tribunal with a ready-made or a predetermined outcome. The special tribunal will look into each case, like in this particular one of Digital Vibes, on the merits, on the evidence, and on the balance of probabilities. And as long as it is proven that it is in the interest of justice that there are allegations of wrongdoing, monies have flown or are alleged to have been wrongfully spent, as long as those factors are determined and established to the conviction of the special tribunal judge or judges, then that is the main issue that needs to be considered.
And how many of these kinds of issues, and particularly related to the COVID-19 pandemic, have you been receiving lately?
Well, of late, we have received quite a lot of such allegations in the form of the SIU coming in. I do not have the number, the exact number, but I could just give a quick highlight. We started with the routing PPE matter involving the Department of Health, and an order was accordingly granted. The matter is still ongoing. Quite recently, we had the routing Department of Education, the decontamination, wherein allegations to the effect that 40+ million has been wrongfully spent. An order was granted to the effect that those companies needed to be interdicted. And at the moment, we are seized with this particular matter. And we hope and anticipate that within the 30 prescribed court days, further action will be considered once the review application comes in.
And of late, would you say that you've become busier than you have been perhaps in a while?
I would say so. My answer is definitely in the affirmative. Because when the special tribunal started, remember, Fuyo, it is only now in 2019, and we started basically or effectively fully functional in 2020. We were hit by COVID, and it's only now that most of the matters that we started with as a special tribunal are only going on trial now. So we are actually getting more and more busy, not only in Gauteng. Our jurisdiction is not only Gauteng, but our jurisdiction extends to all the 9 provinces. So we are receiving files and files of court applications from the SIU. And we do believe that in the next couple of months, between July and the end of November, the end of this year, there will be quite a number of cases. And we do believe, our estimate is that we will even go into the first term of the year 2022.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much for your time, Selby Makoto, who is, of course, from the Special Tribunal. That's the body that gave the SIU permission for 22 million rands in cash and investments belonging to communications company Digital Vibes to be frozen. They want that contract declared null and void, and for those who have benefited wrongfully from this transaction to be made to pay back the money. This conversation continues in a short while. We'll be speaking to the Health Portfolio Committee's chairperson, Dr. Sibongiseni Idlomo. Don't go away. Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, we're looking at the Digital Vibes contract and the criminality that is apparent there. Today, the SIU announcing that the Special Tribunal has granted an interim order prohibiting Digital Vibes and other 6 respondents from disposing of their properties and funds held in the various bank and investment accounts in an effort to recoup an estimated amount of 150 million rands alleged to be from the proceeds of unlawful procurement of activities. And at issue here are 2 transactions. The first involves the department's procurement process to award in 2019, that is to Digital Vibes, to provide communication services related to the NHI. But the second transaction occurred last year, and that is when Digital Vibes was appointed, even though there was no contract. What apparently happened, that there was an extension of the initial NHI contract, and so the Digital Vibes then being asked to conduct a media campaign, but the numbers that are being spoken about are just huge. You're talking about 125 million rands tender given in respect of COVID-19 communications services. Let's bring in now, hopefully we've cleared the technical glitches, Dr. Sibongiseni Idlomo, who is the chairperson of the Health Portfolio Committee. Or it would seem that we continue to have a problem with that. Let's now bring in Chris Vick, who is a communication specialist, someone who has also worked for GCIS as a senior official there. He also worked in the Gauteng Premier's office and knows how these things work. He's going to help us understand whether the numbers that we're dealing with here justify, the amounts of money that have been paid to Digital Vibes. We're also going to bring in the former Deputy CEO, I should say, of GCIS, and that is Dr. Omar. Good evening to both of you gentlemen, and thank you very much for your time this evening. I'm going to start with you, Chris. I mean, you've been very vocal, from the day that we got to hear rumors, back then about this contract.
Yeah. I'm glad they've given me.
Hi, Chris, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
And I'm saying you're one of the people who've been very vocal from day one, saying there's more to this than meets the eye.
Definitely. Well, there's so many different angles to this thing, Will. You know, I think particularly the impact that it's had on public confidence, the impact that it's had on government's ability to communicate. So the fact that there's now more detail is helpful. I think the fact that the assets are being seized is very helpful. But we don't really know the true story around how Digital Vibes was brought on board. And I think that's what we really need to understand from the very beginning. You know, it's just, how did this happen? And I think, you know, maybe a little bit later in the program, we can talk about how government is supposed to procure communication services. But that really is the nub. Who made the decisions, how the decisions were taken, and on what basis they were made.
Typically in these instances, because the suspicion here is that, and that's purely because of Dr. Mkhize's proximity to the Digital Vibes, you know, shareholders and people who work there. The suspicion here is that he may have leaned on the officials or at least facilitated their entry into the system.
Well, I have two perspectives on that. One is in my capacity as a former ministerial special advisor. And I became very aware of the sort of, I guess, the hidden power and the hidden influence that you have if you work in close proximity with a minister, and the impact that can have on officials who make decisions around things like procurement. So it's important to bear that in mind, that the proximity of someone like Tahira Martha to the minister would no doubt have had an impact on decision making. But the other personal experience I have is my time at GCIS. I was responsible for something called the Communication Service Agency, which pioneered the notion of panels of potential service providers. And the thinking there was twofold. One, that GCIS would be able to probe the ability of service providers to provide the kind of services that Digital Vibes offered. The other was to probe, in a sense, the veracity of the businesses themselves. I mean, there was a lot of time spent looking at credentials, looking at work done. And I think where the Digital Vibes Department of Health story becomes interesting is that my understanding is the department actually refused the GCIS offer to screen and assist in identifying a potential service provider, not just ignored advice, but refused advice on how to make the best appointment. And this was with NHI, not only around COVID-19. And I think that, again, asks a lot of questions about how the decision was made. So you've got this ministerial influence, whether it's formal or informal. You've got the department itself turning its back on a process which is specifically designed to filter out dodgy people and is specifically designed to make sure the people you appoint can deliver on what they're expected to do. Now, all of that seems to have been thrown out the window, which is why we end up with the kind of figures that we see where a company procures an animation studio to develop an animated cow for a certain amount and then adds on 1,000% markup. That sort of thing shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen at the procurement stage that you've got companies able to do that, but it should also be picked up by the department itself when it begins to get invoices and when it begins to see the product that there's a problem here. So there's a long, long history. It's not as if somebody sort of woke up in the middle of the night and said there's a problem here. There's a long series of footprints that need to be followed from procurement process through to appointment, through to managing and controlling the quality that came out the other end.
Those footprints, of course, are the reason we couldn't have GCIS here this evening to, you know, plug some of those holes. But I am going to bring in now Dr. Abba Omar, who is a former deputy CEO of GCIS. Dr. Omar, it was never meant to be like this, was it? Because, I mean, from the work that Comtask did before the establishment of GCIS, it was precisely to make sure that things like what we are seeing or we're talking about today never get to happen, but also the capacity of the state is built such that the professionalism, the checks or pre-checks that Chris Vick is talking about actually get done.
Yeah, hi Vuyo, and you can call me Abba still, even on air. So good to be here. Yes, I think the GCIS was created after a lot of thinking, after a lot of comparing with similar organizations and institutions around the world. So I think at one level it provides a centralized service, and I think what Chris was mentioning would be the kind of one element of the work GCIS would be doing, a very critical element, especially when it came to campaigns that needed to be using various media, et cetera, et cetera. So the notion of panels that we could draw on was very important. Hand in hand with that would be coordination of the messaging with other departments and with other parts of government. And that's when we'd have different forums that would come together. And so there was always a need to find a way at one level to centralize and at another level to decentralize. But most times, or I should say, maybe Chris could correct me, I think with just about every major campaign, government departments would invite GCIS to have a representative on the bid adjudication or the panel that would look and weigh up the different responses for the request for proposal. So it is baffling that this could have happened. One understands, this in the heat of war, as we are in at the moment, trying to fight the pandemic, things happen. But there's no excusing, and that's why I think we need to really understand what happened, what went wrong, how did we end up in this kind of situation, and especially with such a major issue as handling the pandemic, and then especially with such a critical line department as the Department of Health.
Just from the little that we all know about this particular case, any red flags you could see even before the SIU told us what it told us today?
I think I wouldn't have picked up any red flags per se, but one was concerned about. I suppose over the past couple of years, we've been concerned about the quality of coordination and the messaging. Now, that's not necessarily the fault of the communicators themselves, I would say, because I have to defend my colleagues, the communicators. But I think during the past few years, there's been a kind of awkward relationship between ministers, communicators, and then the ministers and line. The departments themselves. So I think, when this thing settles down, I think it'll be really important for GCIS to go back to the drawing board and understand what went wrong, how can we improve matters. There's been a number of ways that, they've continued with a lot of what Chris, myself, Joel Nechetenze and others set up, in the late 1990s. Some of that needs to be reviewed, revived. I know they've been looking at improving it in different ways. I think it's time that we had a long, hard look and say, how can we improve it? What can we learn from this?
Now, Chris Vick, as someone who still operates in this space, I'm hoping that we'll be able to play a clip, of an ad. I think it was a 30-second ad you did, and it's in partnership with the SABC, among other people. You managed to create a professional, well-produced clip of about 30 seconds, for which you charged something like 30,000. And when you look at the amounts, you know, that we're talking about when it comes to digital vibes, Chris, we're talking, 125 million rands for organizing what appeared to be media conferences that in the middle of a pandemic, the media would have fallen over themselves to cover anyway. Just your thoughts, Chris, about the amounts that have been mentioned for the tasks that Digital Vibes had to complete.
Well, if we go on what's been published in the media, sorry, and that's all we have at this stage, the figures are outrageous. The organization I'm involved with, COVID Comms, came together partly because government was lacking in providing basic information for people who are information poor. So we were trying to fill the gap between the high-profile press conferences and people who listen to community radio stations or to African language stations on SABC, which is a gap that the Department of Health should have been addressing. And I think if there's one area of criticism with GCIS, if it had maintained the development communications model that Abba, Joel, and others pioneered, then there would have been structures and multi-purpose community centers and relationships and networks in place to provide basic information in multiple languages using plain language that people could access. But that's kind of by the by. It doesn't exist. It was demobilized by the sound of it a couple of years ago. So when the pandemic arrived, formally in March, we started looking at what we could do. And up until, I think, about June this year, our network of 40 to 50 volunteers has operated without pay, which I guess is why now we're able to produce videos at cut-rate prices. But we don't have an office, we don't have a water cooler, we don't drive Bentleys, we don't have the kind of overheads that the ad agencies and presumably the Digital Vibes had, which is partly why we're able to produce material cheaper. But I think ultimately the motive was to save lives, not to get rich. And I think that's the difference. When you have a group of people like we have, mainly young Black women, filmmakers, graphic designers, whose family members are getting ill, they don't ask questions about how much you're going to pay them per hour. They step up and they produce amazing material. I'm hoping you're able to show that video. It's just one of many.
In fact, I wanted to hold your thoughts right there. I want us to play. I've got the clip. I want us to play it very quickly. Let's just have a look at that clip of the ad that was produced by Chris and his company to help really pass the message of COVID-19, especially around the vaccine. Take a look.
Are you 60 years or older? Here's how to register for your COVID-19 vaccine. Register online at vaccine.enroll.health.gov.za or WhatsApp register to 060 012 3456 or dial *134 *832 ID number #. No ID? Just dial *134 *832 #. If you need help, call 0800 029 999. Get the jab. It's free, it's safe, it works. For more information, head to covidcoms.org.za.
Straight and to the point, well and professionally done at a fraction of the cost that it would have probably taken Digital Vibes if they were the ones who had to produce that one. Chris?
Well, thanks, Roy. Just 2 points about it. It's produced by a non-profit organization, not a company. So, even if we do make 10 cents on it, that money goes back into producing more work. The second is you've shown the English version, and there are 5 other language versions available. And it's the total cost of producing those 6 videos with translations, with voiceovers, that cost 30,000 Rand. And I think that's why it stings. Our group has been really, really angry about the kind of costs that the Department of Health paid Digital Vibes to do their work. And that's one conversation. The other is, imagine if the money, the millions that had gone to Digital Vibes, had gone not necessarily to us as COVID comms, but to all the other civil society organizations and Business for South Africa and labor organizations. And they'd adopted the approach of country first, let's save lives. Imagine how much information we'd be able to push out there in African languages, in easy-to-understand videos, animation, radio files, infographics, etc. I think that is the greatest tragedy of the Digital Vibes saga, is how many lives are lost and how much money has been charged.
And our Omar, the things that Chris is talking about and the spirit with which his NGO has approached this whole COVID-19 pandemic is exactly why GCIS had to be established, so that it can harness these energies on the one hand, but on the other also build the state's capacity to do some of these things on its own, and not at the exorbitant amounts that are being mentioned whenever we talk about Digital Vibes.
No, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. On the side of the transactions, there's no doubt we must condemn it. I think people must be punished for the miscreants must be punished, etc. But I think on the government side, on the communication side, they really need to look at this quite deeply. And I think that period when we're looking at what Chris reminded us about development communications, it was also meant to have a relationship between government and civil society, government and business, government and labor in these kind of communications. Somehow we've lost that. So government communicators are often insecure, sitting in their own little buildings or at home now, working virtually. The kind of relationships that we need to have based campaigns around for this pandemic are lost out. Some of the big ones we ran when we were at GCS was, for example, the HIV/AIDS campaign. And yes, the government had to put money in, but it was able to work very closely across society to get the messages across. Now, this would have been an ideal thing, as Chris was saying, of putting country first, mobilizing every little fiber, every muscle that this South African body, politic, and society has around defeating the virus in all its various ways, social behavior as well as through the vaccination, etc. So it's not too late. I think we're still going to be going at this thing for quite a while still. And I think government needs to show the leadership that's required to pull it together and make this an effort that all of society can be involved in.
But Chris, I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a moment. I just want to bring in the chairperson of Parliament's Oversight Committee on Health, and that is Dr. Sibongiseni Dlomo. Dr. Dlomo, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Apologies about the technical glitches a little earlier on. Now, the SIU, as you know by now, has secured an order to freeze 22 million rands in funds linked to Digital Vibes, people and companies. Your response? Dr. Dlomo, can you hear me? Dr. Dlomo, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes. It's Vuyo. I'm saying my question was, with the SIU having secured an order to freeze 22 million rands in funds and equipment and linked to digital Vibes, your response as the Portfolio Committee on Health?
I have not been connected as yet. Have you connected me?
You are connected. We can hear you loudly and clearly, Doc.
Oh, yes.
Your response to today's developments.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And thanks to your viewers.
Your response when you heard that the SIU has been able to secure an order to freeze 22 million rands?
We have not been able to see the report. We were informed that the SIU is going to be preparing and finalizing the report. And until and unless we see it, it could be very difficult to make comments thereon. I hear that there has been some preliminary mention of certain findings, but we don't have that in our space, and we will await that report, and thereafter we will then be able to comment. Some of the things that have come up yet we were aware of. Even the DG did mention that there was irregularity in the procurement, in the award of this tender, and therefore, but they have been requested by the SIU not to continue even with the disciplinary processes until the report has been completed, combined with the other reports that the SIU is actually completing. So what actually has transpired today is something that has not really been brought to our attention, and therefore we will not be able to comment conclusively. But we are well aware that the report, as indicated by the SIU, demand firstly to the president in the end of this month, and will also, as a portfolio committee doing oversight on health, will then be given the report.
But I'm sure you would support, even at least even without knowing what the SIU would have in its final report, the act of being able to freeze millions in funds that went to people unjustifiably.
Yeah, no, Vuyo, from our side, we would not really be able to comment on that because none of those things have really been tabled to us. Why don't you give us space and time to receive the report ourselves as a portfolio committee, engage with it, then be able to give you a proper response?
Well, I mean, critics of what happened in Parliament over the past a couple of weeks say, well, if as the committee you had done the right thing and asked simple questions which would have and demanded simple answers from those who were involved, like or against whom allegations were leveled, like Dr. Mkhize, instead of seeking to obtain an opinion, you know, about whether or not you were within your rights to actually get them to appear before you, you could have simply set them down and asked them to answer to give simple answers to what would have been simple questions.
That process was already set in motion, and since we had actually, as a chairperson, having excused Dr. Mkhize because of the legal advice he got, we then subsequently got another advice from Parliament that no, we should have Minister Mkhize appearing in the portfolio committee to then take us through the report. While that process, the motion was set in for the portfolio committee to have the meeting on the day before, then the president announced that there was going to be an acting minister, and therefore Minister Mkhize was then on special leave. It's unprocedural, therefore, to have a minister acting and then call another minister on top of that minister, while the acting minister has got all the executive authorities. We have come to understand that process and therefore said we will await, in any event, we will await the report, but at this present moment, there is an acting minister who can be able to answer, yes, maybe not all issues related to digital vibes, but to answer what she can. We will then await this report, but at that time, we will then probably be able then to get Minister Mkhize to then add his voice on the report. But for now, we'll call Dr. Mkhize because he is on special leave.
And as far as you're concerned, as the Portfolio Committee on Health, you've done what anyone could have done with the powers that the Constitution gives you.
Look, if we had a backup of our parliamentary legal team, and they came, no, this matter, please proceed and get it done. Isn't it? Because we were actually, we erred on the side of getting a legal opinion that was actually given to Dr. Mkhize, but we quickly corrected ourselves. So we've done everything that we are actually put in place, because we also, as an oversight, have to be guided by what actually comes and transpires. So our legal team in Parliament advised us, and we were then acting according to that advice. It was therefore this new development of an acting, but we had really followed all the necessary steps as advised by the legal team.
Okay, that's why we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much, Dr. Roma. We're going to take a quick ad break with our conversation with Dr. Omar, and Chris Vick continues in a short while. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog, and this evening we're talking about the 150 million rand Health Department media contract that never was. And this conversation taking place on the day the SIU told us that it has secured an order to freeze 22 million rands in funds linked to digital vibes, as well the Special Investigating Unit saying that it is going to seize that amount of money, but also entities and individuals that received payments unlawfully will be made to pay back the money. And in a few days, the SIU will be finalizing a report which they will give to President Cyril Ramaphosa about what they have found out during the investigations that they have been undertaking. But on the line with me now is Abba Omar, who is a former Deputy CEO of GCIS, as well as Chris Vick, who is a communication specialist, but also himself a former official of the Government Information Systems. Now, the question now to Dr. Omar is, how do we correct the wrongs that are apparent?
Yeah. As I said, there's two sort of sides to it. One is the actual procurement within the Department of Health and how that happened. And I think that needs to be addressed urgently. There's far too many people that are taking advantage of this kind of situation where decisions need to be taken quickly. Then the excuse that is used is that bureaucratic red tape prevents us from doing the things that are necessary for the time. So it's okay to take shortcuts, and the bureaucratic red tapes are there to really prevent these kinds of things happening, this kind of abuse of public funds ever happening, etc. So when people start using red tape as a reason to cut corners, I already get suspicious. So I think keep that in mind, and we're going to keep having that in different departments, I think. And I think on the communication side, there's some really worrying red flags, as you mentioned earlier, and things that we need to be paying attention to. Amongst that was, the system it's a system. It's not a service or anything of that sort. And we took great pride in making sure that people understood that it's a system. It's a system of government communication. It's supposed to bring coordination together. It's supposed to bring rationalization of resources. We're not duplicating too many things, etc., etc. Now, you find, for example, that almost all of government is quite correctly caught up in the national response to the pandemic. Yet, you'll find, just to give you a simple example, that early childhood development falls under under the Department of Social Development. And I know, often I say we shouldn't base our arguments just on anecdotal evidence, but teachers that are in the ECD sector are not being included in the vaccination campaign like the rest of the teachers are, because it's a different department. Now, that's, it's never meant to be that way, because ultimately it's the human beings, it's the public servants, it's the teachers that we're supposed to be helping as a whole, whichever department they fall under. So that's the first thing, that our government's response needs to be joined up. Firstly, its communications needs to be much more better coordinated. So you found, for example, that Treasury, well as at the Banking Association, Treasury would be presenting various aspects of the stimulus package that the president had announced, and other government departments would actually be acting against that or undermining what was being announced by the president. So in terms of just communication as well, you need a closer integration. You need to be having clearer messaging and so forth. Then the last thing, and we can't emphasize this often enough, that a government that is able to work closely with the different sectors, business, labor, civil society, is a confident government. If people would respond with the resources, and I think Chris Vicks and his colleagues' initiative is an example of that, where civil society is happy. The rest of society would be glad to have the opportunities to play any kind of meaningful role in the national effort to crush this pandemic. So for me, these are the 2 or 3 things that we need to be bearing in mind, but course-correcting now. We can't wait for some commission of inquiry to be set up, etc. We need to be improving behavior right away.
Chris, there have been complaints before from professionals across the board, not just communications, that the state doesn't really become attractive to the best in whatever industry. I don't know whether you have any thoughts around that, because then it becomes relevant to the issues that Abba is raising, that you need to be able to identify, not only identify the problems, but be able to solve them. And not only solve them, but solve them timelessly. Does the state have that capacity? Is it able to attract the sort of people who will be able to turn things around?
Well, I really wouldn't want to trash people who are working in government communications, because I think given the environment they're in, given the resources at their disposal, and given the political leadership they have, it would be very unfair to blame them for what has happened. I think digital vibes.
Hence, I'm saying broadly, the state's. I'm talking about the state's capacity to attract such people.
I think the broader issue is not just around communicators. I think that Abba would agree. It is very, very hard to work in government. It is very hard to find an outcome of a year's worth of or 2 years worth of work. It's a very slow process. I think what is more innovative is the point I was making about partnerships. GCIS has been very instructive in setting up a network, a national coordinating team, which involves business, labor, civil society, including COVID comms and representatives from government. Now, that's very innovative, and it does imply a sense of confidence because we exchange views, we exchange ideas, we exchange messages, and we exchange information products. And that's only for the past 6 months or so. But it's a different approach to what we've seen before, where government locks itself into a corner and pretends that it can solve anything. So in a sense, the ethos and the culture is changing, which makes it easier to make an impact and easier to build partnerships. And I think that, in a sense, is one future option, to look at ways in which we can all work together. And it might sound a bit cute, but in which all these different societal forces can work together to address issues like a pandemic. Our dream as COVID comms is once this pandemic is out of the way, we want to tackle GBV, we want to tackle domestic violence, racism, xenophobia, etc., in partnership with business, labor, and government, because we really believe that we can't expect government to do it all itself. It's not geared towards efficiency and effectiveness and speed. We can do that. Other people can do that. And I think that's one of the key learnings we would want to see out of what we've experienced now.
Quick last word from you, Abba.
Yeah, I think, it's going back to those basics that we've spoken about in the last half an hour. Put people at the center of our service delivery, but to pay principles have often been trotted out every now and again. We need to keep that foremost in our minds. I think the partnerships that Chris is describing is the way to go, and that's the way we succeeded in probably the most difficult communication campaigns we've had to do. And I think let's hope that there's a quick clinical clearing out of this issue around digital violence, because the Department of Health needs to have a clear kind of mandate to communicate so that people like us can believe the messaging and work with it in whatever way, wherever we are.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks to both of you, Chris Vic, as well as Abba Omar, who were part of, or formed our panel this evening examining the 150 million rand Health Department media contract that, of course, we are now told should be declared null and void. The SIU will be submitting a report over the next few days. They have a deadline of, I think, Wednesday to do so. And earlier this afternoon, they told us that they are busy doing that, which is why they couldn't come through for an extensive discussion of what they have found this far. And that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. From me and the rest of the crew, have a good evening.